But we do know that judges do get to say whether the executive is complying with the law or not. That's been the case for decades, hundreds of years.
Well, I think there's a difference between saying whether you're complying with the law and then you have these individual district court judges setting effectively broad federal policy that is specifically reserved for the President of the United States. I think we do have a constitutional crisis, and it's being caused by these judges. They're not here to tell us. They're not here to tell us how to spend the money. They're not here to set broad federal policy. That is the president's job as elected by the people. These judges are supposed to be settling discrete, specific matters, not policy setting.
In today's video, Phillip absolutely destroys Scott Jennings in a heated debate on CNN's Newsnight with Phillip. Calm but relentless, Phillip cuts through the talking points with hard facts, cornering Scott Jennings every time he tried to dodge. You could see the frustration building as Phillip dismantled Scott Jennings' defenses one by one, leaving him flustered and exposed. So let's dive in and watch how Phillip shuts down Scott Jennings on CNN.
I think Vance is right. I think Trump has a point. And these judges want nothing more to continue the lawfare against
I don't
Trump.
think anybody's going to be surprised to hear that you think Trump is right.
They're doing this on purpose.
However, just on a real important technical point here, one of the main disputes is whether the executive branch can just decide not to spend money that another co-equal branch has said ought to be spent. So it's not just about forcing the federal government to spend money. It's saying Congress said you need to spend this money this way, and the executive branch saying, no, I don't feel like it, and the courts say you have to
Well, my answer to that simply is, it is the executive branch's job to figure out how to spend money once it is appropriated by Congress. And sometimes they spend money that's not been appropriated. But the correct political control is between the executive and the Congress.
I want to return to that because that is also a major legal question.
Do you really think that J.D. Vance's tweet is only about these district judges?
I think
this is a slippery slope because they're going to move on to what the next ruling is. They're setting the stage so that they can say that the executive branch has control now over the judicial branch. They're setting the stage.
No,
and for people who think that President Trump has not planned all of this, he pushes the envelope constantly. There was January 6th. He has a myriad of people out there that would support the executive branch being able to rule over the judicial branch because there have been no repercussions. And when there are not consequences and when there are not repercussions, you get away with it.
I get it. You want individual federal judges who hate Donald Trump
No, I don't.
to tie him up for 4 years.
No, I don't.
If you want a big policy questions decided, let the Supreme Court do it. But in the interim, the executive has to be allowed to govern.
How do we get to the Supreme Court? Can
Just
somebody tell me?
And that's fine. But you can't tie them up
we get
until
to the
it gets
Supreme
there.
Court.
You can't tie them up
we
until
get to
it
the
gets
Supreme
there.
Court by the judges ruling, things going to appeal, and then it goes up.
And in the meantime, what happens? Trump can't act?
In the meantime, you're supposed to comply with the court's rulings. Am I wrong about that?
Well, you're supposed to comply, but Scott's absolutely right in that the court cannot say you have to spend these dollars today. So as a governor, I dealt with this. We got things challenged in state court and federal court. It's all judge-shopped, by the way. Judges don't randomly get these cases. There's a reason that these cases are filed in Boston, the Boston court, or a certain district, Rhode Island, because they know they're going to get a judge that is politically
great
favorable.
bipartisan practice as well.
Yeah. Both sides do it. I mean, I think...
How many times that district court and judge one guy in Texas shut down Joe Biden?
But you raised the right point. Should the president, the singular president, should he have to share the presidency with 300 district court judges? No, absolutely not.
But the point, though, you made a really good point that there have been judges that shut down some of President Biden's executive actions, and they understand, the Biden administration understood the checks and balances.
The Supreme Court tried to stop me, but they never will.
But not in the way that Donald Trump is.
Who said that? Joe Biden.
Yeah,
Joe Biden.
But Scott, he actually didn't ignore it.
He did.
Right.
They continued to plow forward with student
No, he
aid. How much
didn't.
did they
What Scott Jennings is glossing over here is the Constitution itself. Article I gives Congress, not the president, the power of the purse. That means when Congress appropriates money, the executive branch doesn't get to say, nah, I don't feel like spending it. Courts stepping in to enforce that separation of power isn't lawfare, it's literally how checks and balance are supposed to work. The Supreme Court already weighed in on this in Crane v. City of New York 1975. When Nixon tried to withhold funds Congress had appropriated for environmental programs. The court ruled the president couldn't just ignore Congress. That precedent applies just as much today as it did then. And Scott Jennings claimed that Biden said the Supreme Court tried to stop me, but they never will is flat out false. Biden has repeatedly emphasized that he respects court rulings, even when he disagrees with them. For example, after the court struck down his student loan forgiveness plan in 2023, Biden openly said the court has blocked it. I'm not going to let that stop us, but we'll do it the right way. That's not defiance, that's compliance with the law while seeking alternative legal routes. Compare that with Trump, who openly defied courts from the Muslim ban in 2017 until it reached the Supreme Court, to repeatedly ignoring subpoenas during investigations. Abby Phillip is right to point out the danger here. Once you normalize the idea that a president can dismiss the judiciary as partisan, lawfare, you're not defending executive power. You're eroding the rule of law itself.
No, but let me set the record up.
He actually got dinged on the student
I
loan
hated the
forgiveness.
student loan forgiveness policy.
What did he say out loud?
I thought it was a ridiculous policy. I thought it was unconstitutional. I predicted it would get struck down. It did get struck down, and I applauded. He did not ignore it, though. He went and tried under a different law.
So he ignored it.
You're allowed. No,
That's not ignoring it. That
So
is
he
trying
not
to
ignoring
make
it.
it
He's
work
trying to
under
do
the
it.
law.
He's
He
trying to do
literally
it.
defied it.
But let me just understand where you stand. If a district court judge rules in a way that the president dislikes, should the president listen or should the president defy?
If a district court judge tries to usurp the authority of the chief executive of this country, he should absolutely defy it. There's a difference between broad policy decisions and discrete disputes between parties. That's the difference. If I want a policy decided, I'll take it to the
But
Supreme
what about
Court.
checks and balances?
Well, Scott, you're
What
also
about
of a
checks and
district
balances?
court judge?
What I
Who
can't
elected
what I
them?
can't get with is you talking in these bizarre, broad generalities.
It's not bizarre.
Every single one of these cases deals with a discrete issue. Okay, it deals with funding. It deals with with certain constitutionally or statutorily appointed roles. Every single one of these things is a distinct thing, and they're all being dealt with by different judges. So it's not broad swaths of policy here. When the court says Congress, appropriated this money, you must unfreeze it while we litigate this. Why can't Trump comply with that?
So you're saying that a judge should decide how and when money is spent
judge is saying
for years, and not the president of the United
Scott,
States?
Let me explain
You're a governor,
little bit
you
more.
know.
Let me explain it a little bit more slowly. A judge is saying
You don't have to talk to me like that.
Congress.
I have a position on this, and you have an
Okay.
opinion. We can disagree.
Yeah, but I'm saying you listen to me because you're not listening and you're making claims that are not connected to the facts. The judge is saying
Maybe you are.
Congress appropriated a certain amount of money.
Yeah.
We need to litigate this.
Okay.
While we litigate this, we're going to put a hold on the actions that you took that might be unconstitutional.
So while we
That's
litigate,
part of the process. Why
this, I'm a
doesn't
judge
that
and
work?
I'm in charge of the executive branch, and you're not. Forget it.
Yeah,
I totally
you just
disagree.
can't compel the executive branch to spend the dollars. You can't do that. They
Okay.
can't say we're going to start. The
Have
judges
you
are going to
heard
start
of
writing
the
the checks. They have every
impoundment?
right to
Have you
hold
heard
that.
of the Impoundment Control Act of 1974?
No.
Okay, well let me play this. let me play
By the
this.
way, none of your viewers have
Okay,
either.
well I'm gonna
can explain it in a
play this clip for you.
What Chris Sununu and Scott Jennings are brushing up on is that this exact issue has already been settled in law after Nixon tried to withhold congressionally appropriated funds in the early 1970s. Congress passed the Impoundment Control Act of 1974. That law explicitly says the president cannot simply decide not to spend money that Congress has directed to be spent. In fact, the Supreme Court reinforced this in Train v. City of New York, ruling unanimously that the executive must follow Congress's spending decisions. So when Trump freezes or redirects funds against Congress's mandate, it's not a bold political maneuver. It's unlawful, and it's not just theory. Trump's attempt to divert billions of dollars for his border wall after Congress refused to fully fund it was struck down in multiple courts for violating both the appropriations process and the separation of powers. Even conservative conservative legal scholars warned at the time that allowing presidents to override Congress on spending would set a dangerous precedent, essentially turning the executive into a king with unilateral control of the purse. Meanwhile, Biden's response to court rulings on student loans showed the contrast. He didn't defy the Supreme Court, he pivoted and tried a different legal path under the Higher Education Act of 1965, which is exactly what a president is supposed to do when policy hits a judicial roadblock. That's respecting the rule of law, even if you disagree with the decision.
This is in Congress. Russ Vought, who is the architect of a lot of this, was being questioned in Congress about the Impoundment Control Act, which actually says that the executive branch should spend the money how Congress appropriated it. Here's what he said is going on right now in the federal government.
Do you believe the Impoundment Control Act of 1974 is the law of the land that you must follow?
It is the law of the land. As you know, the president has run on that issue. He believes it's unconstitutional. For 200 years, presidents had the ability to spend less than an appropriation if they could do it for less. And we have seen the extent to which this law has contributed to waste, fraud, and abuse.
So, Ellie, this is the law of the land. They might be wanting to challenge it, but it is the law.
Right. The Impoundment Control Act says essentially the president cannot block money allocated by Congress. To the power of district court judges, and I understand your point, Scott. I understand the frustration people have when a district court judge blocks a broad mandate from the chief executive, the elected chief executive. Ultimately, you know, the big issues go up to the Supreme Court. But I guess I would ask both of you, what if a district court judge had blocked Barack Obama's DACA plan, the Dreamers plan, right? And he said, heck with you, I'm doing it anyway. Would you be okay with that, or would you have a problem with that?
No,
Would that be okay?
Yeah. So again, that's where we're forgetting a key piece of the third branch of government. That's where Congress steps in.
Yes.
Right? You have to remember that a judge can't just say, well, I'm going to arbitrarily block something. They say, I'm blocking it because of this, and Congress can step in and be more specific and more refined if they want to.
Well, how does that work with Congress, who's appropriated funds for all of these other agencies?
So it can't work that
and now,
way.
And now the executive branch is stepping on Congress.
If Congress appropriates $20 million for a program, do you, as the chief executive, do I have to spend $20 million on that program?
Well, actually, this is what I'm trying to. This is why I brought.
Because if I don't, what's the number?
I know that
Why
the
not do a
impoundment.
bit of an investigation into it first?
I know that the Impoundment Control Act thing sounds really wonky. But I guess the point I'm trying to make is that I understand the idea of testing laws. You want to see how far you can go. But the question that you are asking has been answered by the courts, okay? The reason that the Impoundment Control Act exists is to say that when Congress says we appropriate this money, it should be spent that way. That's their power. They have the power of the
Every
purse.
state in the country, when we pass a balanced budget, and I'll explain what a balanced budget is
Again,
to everyone in
it's a
Washington in a minute.
dispute, but I'm
we don't
saying
spend, this
that
called the
hasn't
lapse.
been proven
There's
in
hundreds of millions of dollars in New Hampshire that intentionally do not get spent on certain programs.
What
They're supposed
about
to lapse back into
when the
system.
Trump administration says to Congress, you created this agency, we're going to just decide it doesn't exist anymore?
He runs the executive branch. He can decide who works for the executive branch.
So
He can decide who
where does
doesn't.
this end? So
It doesn't.
Congress creates an agency, the executive says, to heck with it. Congress appropriates money, the executive branch says, to heck with it. Where does this end?
So it ends. You can go back, and I like what they're doing, and they're going to whiteboard these programs out, and they're going to force each of these departments to come back and actually justify their existence, which no one in Washington has done for decades. If you want NIH money to go forward, explain to me why, how, and how it's going to be spent.
All right, so the next
That's all. They're
Democratic
going to
president
force
who
them
says
to the table.
ICE is going to just disappear, I expect that the two of you will say that sounds
I think all of America.
What's really at stake here is the separation of powers, and the law is crystal clear. The Impoundment Control Act of 1974 wasn't some random technicality. It was passed after Nixon tried to withhold funds Congress had already appropriated. Congress said no, and the Supreme Court backed that up in Train v. City of New York. That ruling established that the president cannot unilaterally block or cancel spending that Congress has already approved. Period. So when Scott and Chris float the idea that Trump or any president can just decide not to spend or even erase entire agencies that Congress created, that's not bold leadership. That's a constitutional crisis. Imagine if Obama had ignored courts and said, I'll implement DACA regardless of your ruling, or if a future Democratic president tried to abolish ICE by flat. Republicans would call that lawless, and they'd be right. The standard can't suddenly see change when it's Trump pushing the limits. And Sununu's point about governors leaving money unspent in their states isn't the same thing. State executives are still bound by their legislators' appropriations, and when they withhold funds improperly, they get sued too. The difference is those disputes are settled under each state's constitution. At the federal level, the power of the purse belongs solely to Congress under Article I. The executive doesn't get to just ignore that because it's inconvenient. Abby Phillip's warning is spot on. If we normalize presidents blowing off Congress and the courts, there's no logical endpoint. Today, it's Trump saying, ignore this appropriation. Tomorrow, it's a Democrat saying ignore ICE or the Pentagon. That's not checks and balances, that's dismantling them altogether. Pause. Are you getting tired of getting half the story from biased news sources? One outlet says one thing and another says the complete opposite. How are you supposed to know what's actually true? That's where ground news comes in. It lets you compare how different media outlets, left, right, and center are covering the same story. So you can see the full picture instead of just the echo chamber. And here's the best part. Click the link in the description and get 40% off the Vantage tier, which gives you even deeper insights into media bias and political trends. Stay informed, think for yourself, and check out ground news in the description down below.